Banned from the aisle, I signed 3 fat checks and shut their date down, then demanded respect, an apology, and my place at her side. Or else.
My daughter called me at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she used when she needed something expensive. The same tone that had convinced me to buy her first car, pay for her college tuition, and cover the down payment on her apartment downtown. But today was different. Today, that sweetness had an edge to it. "Dad, I need to talk to you about the wedding," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she'd rehearsed them. "David and I have been discussing the guest list, and we've made some difficult decisions about keeping things intimate." I set down my coffee cup on the kitchen table I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago, the same table where she'd done homework as a child, where we'd shared countless breakfast conversations about her dreams and ambitions. Something cold settled in my chest. "Intimate," I repeated slowly. "How intimate are we talking about, sweetheart?" The pause stretched between us like a chasm opening in real time. In that silence, I could hear her breathing, could almost see her fidgeting with her engagement ring, the way she always did when she was nervous. "We've decided to limit it to immediate family only, just parents and siblings. You know how expensive venues are these days, and David's family has some specific expectations about the ceremony." David's family, the Ashworths, old money from the east side of town, the kind of people who summered in Martha's Vineyard and considered anyone who worked with their hands to be part of the service industry. I'd met them exactly twice, both times feeling like a specimen under glass. "Of course I understand completely," I said, though my grip tightened on the phone. "So, when do I need to get fitted for my tux?" Another pause, this one longer, more uncomfortable. "Dad, that's what I'm trying to tell you. When I say immediate family, I mean David's parents, his sister, and my mom. We're keeping it very small, very exclusive." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood up from my chair so quickly it scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and final in the morning quiet. "I'm not invited to your wedding." It wasn't a question. The reality was settling over me like winter fog, cold and all-encompassing. "It's not that we don't want you there," she said quickly, her voice rising with that familiar defensive tone. "It's just that David's family has certain traditions, certain expectations about the ceremony. They're very particular about maintaining the right atmosphere." The right atmosphere. I looked around my kitchen at the evidence of 40 years of hard work. The house I'd bought and renovated with my own sweat and determination. The life I'd built from nothing so my daughter could have every opportunity I'd never had. And what atmosphere would that be? Exactly. You know how you get sometimes, Dad. You're loud, you tell those construction stories. You don't always understand the social dynamics of these events. David's parents are sophisticated people. They went to Harvard. They know senators and judges. This wedding is important for David's career, and we can't have any disruptions. Disruptions. 34 years of raising her, of being there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every moment of triumph and disappointment. And now I was a potential disruption. "I see," I said quietly, "and your mother agreed to this?" Mom understands the situation better than anyone. She knows how important this is for my future, for our future. Our future, not mine. Theirs. "Well then," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I suppose that settles it." "Oh, Dad, thank you for understanding. I knew you'd see reason. We're still planning a small reception afterward, maybe just cake and champagne at David's parents' house. We'll make sure to save you some cake." Save me some cake! Like I was a neighbor who'd helped them move furniture, deserving of leftover dessert as payment for services rendered. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart. I have to run now. David's picking me up for our venue walkthrough. We're looking at 3 different places today: the Grandview Manor, Riverside Gardens, and the historic Whitmore Estate. All absolutely gorgeous, but so expensive. Even with David's family contributing, it's going to be tight." After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my empty house, staring at the phone in my hand like it was evidence of a crime. Somewhere across town, my daughter was touring wedding venues with the man she'd chosen over her own father. Venues I'd never see her walk down the aisle in. Venues where I'd never give the father of the bride's speech I'd been mentally rehearsing since she turned 16. But as I sat there, something began to shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate. But underneath it, something else was growing. Something harder and more focused. I opened my laptop and typed the names she'd mentioned into a search engine. Grandview Manor appeared first, an elegant estate with sweeping gardens and a ballroom that could hold 200 guests. The website showed happy couples dancing under crystal chandeliers, families celebrating in rooms that screamed old money and established tradition. Riverside Gardens was more rustic but equally impressive, with outdoor ceremony spaces overlooking the river and reception halls decorated with exposed beams and fairy lights. The kind of place where David's Harvard-educated family could feel both sophisticated and charmingly down to earth. The historic Whitmore Estate was the crown jewel, a restored 19th century mansion with a guest capacity of 300, gardens that had been featured in wedding magazines, and a price tag that made my eyes water. I scrolled through photo after photo of beautiful ceremonies, of fathers walking their daughters down rose petal strewn aisles, of families gathered in celebration of love and new beginnings. Everything I'd been denied. My phone buzzed with a text message, a photo from Rebecca showing off her engagement ring to her coworkers with the caption, "Can't wait for Dad to see this in person at the wedding." But there would be no in person for me. There would be no proud father moment, no dance with my little girl, no speech about watching her grow from a stubborn toddler into the accomplished woman she'd become. I closed the laptop and walked to my home office, where I kept my financial records in the filing cabinet Rebecca had bought me for Father's Day 3 years ago. The same filing cabinet she'd insisted was much more organized than those messy piles of papers you always have lying around. Inside the manila folders marked investments and savings, I found exactly what I was looking for. 40 years of careful financial planning, of living below my means, of sacrificing immediate pleasures for long-term security. Money I'd been saving for retirement, for emergencies, for the kind of comfortable old age that didn't burden anyone else. But what was the point of financial security if the people you'd worked so hard to provide for didn't consider you worth including in their most important moments? I pulled out my calculator and started adding numbers. The house was paid off, worth approximately $400,000 in today's market. My 401k had grown steadily over the decades, now sitting at just over $200,000. The savings account Rebecca didn't know about, the one I'd been contributing to since she graduated college, contained another $150,000, $750,000, more than enough for a comfortable retirement, also more than enough to make a very different kind of statement. I opened my laptop again and navigated back to the wedding venue websites. This time, I wasn't looking at them as a father who'd been excluded from his daughter's wedding. I was looking at them as a potential customer with very deep pockets. Grandview Manor's contact form was elegantly simple: name, phone number, email address, and a text box for special requests. I filled it out methodically, my fingers steady on the keyboard. Special requests. Interested in booking venue for extended private events, budget flexible. Please contact immediately for consultation. Riverside Gardens had a similar form, though theirs asked for preferred dates and estimated guest count. I left those fields blank and simply wrote, "Cash buyer interested in multiple bookings, no date restrictions." The historic Whitmore Estate required a phone consultation for bookings over a certain dollar amount. Perfect. I dialed their number and waited for someone to answer. Whitmore Estate Events, this is Patricia speaking. How may I help you today? Patricia's voice was smooth and professional, with just enough warmth to suggest genuine interest in making dreams come true. "I'm interested in booking your venue for several events over the next few months. I understand you have some of the most exclusive spaces in the city." "We certainly do, sir. Our estate has been hosting elegant celebrations for over 30 years. What type of events were you considering?" I looked out my kitchen window at the garden where Rebecca had played as a child, where she'd practiced walking in high heels before her prom, where she'd told me about David's proposal just 6 months ago. "I'm planning some very special celebrations," I said, "the kind that people remember for the rest of their lives. Money is no object. When can we schedule a consultation?" "I have an opening this afternoon at 2 o'clock, if that works for your schedule." "Perfect, I'll see you then." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not since I'd started my own construction company, with nothing but a pickup truck and a determination to build something lasting. The thrill of taking control, of refusing to be a victim of other people's decisions. Rebecca thought she could erase me from the most important day of her life because I didn't fit the image she wanted to project to David's family. She thought my presence would be disruptive to their perfect, sophisticated celebration. She had no idea what disruption actually looked like. But she was about to learn. I spent the rest of the morning researching wedding industry pricing, vendor contacts, and the kind of connections that money could buy in a city where reputation meant everything. By noon, I had a list of phone numbers and a strategy that would have impressed my business school professors if I'd ever had the luxury of attending business school. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca had spent her entire life benefiting from my lack of formal education, from the fact that I'd chosen work over college so I could provide for her mother and her. Now, that same work ethic, that same strategic thinking that had built our comfortable life, was about to be turned in a very different direction. My phone rang as I was putting on my best suit, the charcoal gray one Rebecca had picked out for her college graduation. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson, this is Marcus Webb from Grandview Manor. I received your inquiry about private events, and I have to say your timing is quite interesting. I straightened my tie in the hallway mirror, the same mirror where Rebecca had practiced her wedding poses just last month, when she thought I wasn't watching. Interesting how, Mr. Webb? Well, we've actually had some last-minute availability open up. A high-profile wedding scheduled for next month just increased their guest requirements beyond our capacity. They're looking for a larger venue now. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. What date are we talking about? June 15th. It's a Saturday, premium pricing, but if you're serious about multiple bookings, we might be able to work something out. June 15th, Rebecca's wedding date. The day I was supposed to be sitting at home, excluded from my daughter's happiness while David's family celebrated their perfect, disruption-free ceremony. I'm very serious, Mr. Webb. In fact, I'd like to discuss exclusive arrangements for that entire weekend. Money, as I mentioned, is not a concern. The drive to Grandview Manor took me through the part of town where Rebecca had grown up, past her old elementary school, and the park where I taught her to ride a bicycle. Every familiar landmark felt different now, like I was seeing my own life through someone else's eyes. The manor itself was even more impressive in person than it had appeared online. Sweeping driveways lined with mature oak trees, gardens that looked like they'd been designed by artists rather than landscapers, and a main building that managed to be both grand and welcoming. Marcus Webb met me at the main entrance, a man in his 50s with the kind of polished appearance that came from years of managing other people's special occasions. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine but professional. Mr. Thompson, welcome to Grandview Manor. I have to admit, your call has us quite intrigued. It's not often we get inquiries for multiple exclusive bookings. He led me through the main hall, pointing out architectural details and capacity numbers with practiced ease. The ballroom could hold 200 guests for dinner, 300 for cocktail reception. The garden ceremony space had been the setting for over 1,000 weddings, including several that had been featured in national magazines. This is where most couples exchange vows, he said, gesturing toward an elegant gazebo surrounded by rose bushes that wouldn't reach full bloom until next month. The photography opportunities are endless, and the acoustics are perfect for both intimate ceremonies and larger celebrations. I could picture Rebecca walking down that aisle, her dress trailing behind her, David waiting at the altar with his Harvard-educated smile. Could picture his parents nodding approvingly at the sophisticated setting, the perfect backdrop for their son's perfect wedding. Could picture myself not being there to see any of it. Tell me about the June 15th availability, I said. Marcus pulled out his tablet, scrolling through what I assumed were booking schedules and pricing tiers. The original clients had booked our premium package, ceremony, reception, bridal suite, grounds access for photography, the complete experience. They've already made a substantial deposit, but they'll forfeit that if they cancel. How substantial? $25,000, non-refundable according to our standard contract terms. $25,000. More than I'd spent on my first house, but less than I'd contributed to Rebecca's college education. Less than the car I'd bought her for graduation. Certainly less than the value of being included in my only daughter's wedding. And if I were to book that date exclusively, what would we be looking at financially? Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. For exclusive access to the entire property, the ceremony space, both ballrooms, the gardens, bridal facilities, parking, and grounds, we're looking at approximately $60,000 for the day, plus catering and additional services. $60,000 for one day. The kind of money that would have seemed impossible when Rebecca was young, when every dollar had been carefully budgeted and every expense weighed against necessities. The kind of money I could now spend without materially impacting my financial security. I'll take it. Marcus blinked. I'm sorry? June 15th, exclusive access to the entire property. I'll take it. Mr. Thompson, perhaps we should discuss your specific event requirements first. Guest count, catering needs, timing, decorations. These details affect pricing significantly, and I'll pay full premium rates for everything. Consider it a blank check arrangement. When do you need the deposit? The transformation in Marcus's demeanor was immediate and complete. The polite professionalism shifted into something approaching reverence, the way people looked at customers who represented commission bonuses and year-end performance reviews. I can have contracts drawn up within the hour. A 50% deposit would secure the booking immediately, with the balance due 2 weeks before the event. $30,000. I pulled out my checkbook, the same checkbook I'd used to pay for Rebecca's orthodontics, her school clothes, her college textbooks. The pen felt weightier than usual as I wrote out the numbers. There's one more thing, I said, tearing off the check and handing it to Marcus. I'll need you to contact the original clients who were booked for that date. Let them know the venue is no longer available. Marcus looked confused. Sir, we typically handle cancellations with more notice. The clients will need time to find alternative arrangements. And ethically, tell them exactly what happened. Tell them someone made a better offer, someone who valued the venue more than they did, someone who understood that important occasions require significant investment. Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. This wasn't just about booking a venue. This was about sending a message. And in the wedding industry, messages traveled fast through a surprisingly small community of vendors, venues, and service providers. I'll make those calls immediately, he said. Is there anything else you'll need for your event? I thought about Rebecca's Pinterest boards, the ones she'd shown me months ago when she was still including me in her wedding plans. The color schemes, the flower arrangements, the specific details that would make her day perfect in every way she'd dreamed. Actually, yes, I'll need the contact information for your preferred vendors. Florists, photographers, musicians, caterers. The best ones. The ones that book up months in advance. Marcus was already pulling out his phone. I have an excellent list. These are the vendors we recommend to our most discerning clients. Though I should mention, with such short notice, availability might be limited. Money solves availability problems, I said. Trust me on that. As I drove away from Grandview Manor with a signed contract in my briefcase and a receipt for $30,000 in my wallet, I felt something that had been missing since Rebecca's phone call that morning. Purpose. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. Just finished the venue tour. David's parents loved Grandview Manor, but it's so expensive. Might have to go with our second choice. Wish money wasn't such an issue. I pulled over to the side of the road and typed back. Don't worry about money, sweetheart. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should. Then I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Riverside Gardens. Hello, this is Robert Thompson. I'm interested in booking an event for June 15th. I understand you might have availability, and I'm prepared to make a very competitive offer. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had signed contracts with all 3 venues Rebecca had toured that morning: Grandview Manor, Riverside Gardens, and the historic Whitmore Estate. 3 of the most exclusive wedding locations in the city, all booked for the same date, all paid for with deposits that would make cancellation financially devastating for anyone else. But I wasn't anyone else. I was a father who'd spent 34 years building a life around someone who'd decided I wasn't worth including in her most important moment. Rebecca called as I was reviewing the contracts spread across my kitchen table. Dad, the strangest thing happened today. All 3 venues we looked at are suddenly unavailable for our date. Grandview Manor said someone made an offer they couldn't refuse. Riverside Gardens got booked by a private client who paid cash up front. Even the Whitmore Estate, which never books less than 6 months in advance, is mysteriously unavailable. Her voice carried a note of panic I hadn't heard since she was 12 and thought she'd lost her science fair project the night before it was due. That is strange, I agreed. The wedding industry can be very unpredictable. We're going to have to postpone or find somewhere completely different. David's parents are furious. They've already sent save the dates to their friends. His mother said this kind of thing doesn't happen to people like them. People like them. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a fire I deliberately set. I'm sure you'll figure something out, sweetheart. You're resourceful, just like your old man. This is a disaster, Dad. Everything was planned perfectly, and now it's all falling apart. I don't understand how this could happen. I looked at the contracts on my table, each one representing a small fortune and a very large statement. Each one proving that disruption was exactly what I'd promised it would be. Sometimes, I said quietly, things fall apart so they can be rebuilt the right way. After I hung up with Rebecca, I sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, surrounded by contracts that represented more money than most people spent on a house. The weight of what I'd done was beginning to settle in, but instead of regret, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. My phone rang again at 7:30. This time, it was David himself, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Mr. Thompson, Rebecca told me about the venue situation. I have to ask, do you know anything about this? It seems awfully coincidental that all three places we looked at became unavailable on the same day." I leaned back in my chair, the same chair where I'd helped him study for his bar exam just 2 years ago, back when I was still considered family, back when my blue-collar wisdom was useful for understanding real-world applications of legal theory. "David, I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The wedding industry is competitive. These things happen." "No, Mr. Thompson, these things don't just happen. Not to venues like Grandview Manor, not to families like mine." My father called his connections at the country club. "Word is someone with serious money came in today and bought out half the premium venues in the city." Serious money. I almost smiled. If only he knew that serious money had come from 40 years of getting up at 5 in the morning, of working weekends when other fathers were at their kids' soccer games, of choosing generic groceries so Rebecca could have name brand everything. Well then, maybe whoever it was had very important reasons for needing those venues. The silence stretched between us like a negotiation neither of us wanted to lose. When David spoke again, his voice had shifted into what Rebecca called his lawyer mode, all cold precision and calculated intimidation. "If you're involved in this somehow, you need to understand the consequences. My family has influence in this city, business connections, political relationships, social standing that goes back generations. Whatever game you think you're playing, you're out of your league." Game. As if 40 years of being a father was something I'd entered into casually for entertainment. As if raising his fiancée from a stubborn toddler into the accomplished woman he claimed to love was some kind of hobby I'd picked up. "David, I appreciate the warning, but I think you might be overestimating your family's influence and underestimating mine." "Your influence? You're a construction worker." The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that I wondered how many times he'd said it. How many conversations with Rebecca had included that phrase, spoken with the same tone someone might use to describe a service they no longer needed. "I was a construction worker," I corrected quietly. "Now I'm a man with very deep pockets and apparently much better connections than you realized." I hung up before he could respond, but I didn't turn off the phone. I wanted to see what would happen next, how quickly word would spread through their social circles, how long it would take for the panic to really set in. The answer was 43 minutes. Rebecca called in tears, her voice breaking with the kind of desperation I remembered from her teenage years when everything felt like the end of the world. "Daddy, please, if you know anything about what's happening, you have to help me. David's family's talking about postponing everything. His mother says the guest list expectations can't be changed, and without a proper venue, the whole wedding will be an embarrassment to their reputation." "Daddy," she hadn't called me that in 3 years, not since she'd started dating David and decided that particular term of endearment was too childish for someone engaged to a Harvard law graduate. "Rebecca, I'm confused. This morning you told me I wasn't invited to your wedding because I didn't fit the right atmosphere. Now you're calling me daddy and asking for help. Which version of our relationship are we operating under today?" Her crying intensified, the kind of sobbing that used to break my heart when she was small and had scraped her knee or lost a favorite toy, the kind that had made me move mountains to fix whatever was wrong in her world. "I know what I said this morning was wrong. I know it hurt you. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under. David's parents have expectations, and his career depends on making the right impression. I thought maybe if we just had a small ceremony, we could avoid any complications." Complications. Yesterday, I was a disruption. Today, I was a complication. Tomorrow, if this continued, I might actually become her father again. "And what exactly did you think would complicate your perfect wedding, sweetheart?" The pause told me everything I needed to know. She was calculating how much truth she could afford to tell, how much honesty the situation required. David's mother said that having working-class family at the ceremony might send the wrong message to their social circle. She said it was nothing personal against you, just that appearances matter in their world. Their world. Not her world, not our world. Their world, where fathers who'd sacrificed everything for their daughters weren't welcome at the celebrations their sacrifices had made possible. "I see, and you agreed with this assessment? I thought maybe it would be easier for everyone if we kept things simple. but now everything's falling apart and I don't know what to do. I walked to my home office and opened the file cabinet where I kept Rebecca's childhood mementos. Report cards where teachers had written comments about her intelligence and determination, photos from school plays where she'd insisted I sit in the front row, Father's Day cards made from construction paper and glue, with messages written in crayon. My daddy is the best daddy in the world because he works hard to take care of me. Rebecca, let me ask you something. Do you remember when you were 8 years old and you wanted to join the traveling soccer team? Dad, this isn't the time for. Do you remember what that cost? The registration fees, the equipment, the travel expenses for tournaments in other cities? Her crying quieted slightly. I remember you working extra jobs to pay for it. I worked construction during the day and cleaned office buildings at night for 6 months, so you could play soccer with the kids whose parents could afford it without thinking twice. Do you remember what you told me after your first tournament victory? Silence. You said, Daddy, I'm so glad you're my dad because you never let me down. I closed the file cabinet and returned to the kitchen. I never let you down, Rebecca. Not once in 34 years. But this morning, you let me down in a way I didn't think was possible. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Daddy. Please help me fix this. I looked at the contracts spread across my table. 3 venues that would sit empty on June 15th unless I decided otherwise. 3 opportunities to teach lessons about family loyalty, about respect, about the consequences of treating people like they were disposable. I might be able to make some phone calls, I said finally. I might be able to help you find a venue for your wedding. The relief in her voice was immediate. Oh, thank you, Daddy. Thank you so much. I knew you'd. But there will be conditions. The relief faltered. What kind of conditions? First, I will be invited to your wedding. Not as an afterthought, not as a compromise, but as your father who will walk you down the aisle and give a speech about the daughter he raised and the woman she's become. Of course, absolutely. I never should have. Second, David's family will treat me with respect. Not tolerance, not politeness, but genuine respect for the man who made their son's happiness possible. I'll talk to them. I'll make them understand. Third, and this is non-negotiable, you will personally apologize to me in front of David and his parents for suggesting that I wasn't good enough to attend your wedding. The silence stretched longer this time. I could almost hear her weighing the humiliation of public apology against the disaster of having no wedding venue. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it, whatever it takes. Good. I'll make some calls tomorrow morning. But Rebecca, understand this clearly. If you or David or his family ever treat me as less than family again, I won't be making helpful phone calls. I'll be making very different kinds of calls to very different kinds of people. After she hung up, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey I'd been saving for her wedding toast. The whiskey I thought I'd never have occasion to drink. But plans change, people change, and sometimes fathers who've been taken for granted discover they have more power than anyone realized. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Rebecca told me about your conversation. We appreciate your willingness to help resolve this situation. Perhaps we can discuss terms like reasonable adults. Terms like this was a business negotiation instead of a family crisis they'd created. I typed back, the terms are simple. Treat me like family or find your own venue. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Then I opened my laptop and began researching something I'd never thought I'd need to know about. Wedding planners who specialized in last-minute luxury events. Because if Rebecca and David agreed to my conditions, I was going to give them a wedding that would be talked about for years. And if they didn't agree, I was going to give them a lesson in consequences that would be remembered even longer. Either way, June 15th was going to be a day that changed everything. The next morning brought coffee that tasted better than it had in months, and a phone call I'd been expecting since dawn. Marcus Webb from Grandview Manor, his voice carrying the kind of careful curiosity that came from dealing with eccentric, wealthy clients. Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling so early. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's booking and discuss some unusual requests I've been receiving. I settled into my chair with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky the same colors Rebecca had chosen for her wedding flowers. What kind of requests, Marcus? Well, I've had 3 separate calls this morning from people claiming to represent your daughter. They're asking about the availability of our June 15th booking, suggesting there might be some family arrangement that could allow them to use the venue. Family arrangement. Even in crisis, they couldn't bring themselves to say the words, her father owns the venue booking because we excluded him from the wedding. And what did you tell them? Exactly what our contract specifies. The venue is exclusively booked to Robert Thompson for June 15th, and any changes to that arrangement would need to come directly from you. Perfect. Let them scramble. Let them make phone calls and pull whatever strings they thought they had. Let them discover that all their connections and social influence meant nothing when faced with someone who'd simply outspent them. Marcus, I may have some updates to the booking arrangements later today. Can you keep the afternoon open for a possible consultation? Of course, Mr. Thompson. Given the size of your deposit, we're available whenever you need us. The size of my deposit. $30,000 that I'd earned one overtime shift at a time, one carefully budgeted year at a time. Money that represented decades of choosing practicality over luxury so my daughter could have choices I'd never had. My phone rang again before I'd finished my coffee. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was unmistakably familiar. Mr. Thompson, this is Catherine Ashworth, David's mother. I believe we need to have a conversation. Catherine, the woman who'd shaken my hand exactly twice in the 3 years Rebecca and David had been together, both times with the kind of smile that suggested she was being photographed for a charity newsletter. The woman who'd made it clear that my presence at family gatherings was tolerated rather than welcomed. Good morning, Catherine. What can I do for you? I think you know exactly why I'm calling. This situation with the venues has gotten out of hand, and it's time for adults to handle it properly. Adults. As if I'd been acting childishly by refusing to be excluded from my own daughter's wedding. I'm not sure what situation you're referring to. I've simply made some business transactions that seem like good investments. Mr. Thompson, please. We both know this isn't about investments. You're angry about the guest list situation, and you're taking it out on the children. This isn't the way mature people handle disagreements. The children. Rebecca was 32 years old, had a master's degree in marketing, and ran campaigns for major corporate clients. David was 34, a practicing attorney with his own office downtown. But to Catherine, they were children whose wedding was being disrupted by an unreasonable working-class father who didn't understand his place. Catherine, let me make sure I understand your position. You decided I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend my daughter's wedding. You convinced her that my presence would be an embarrassment to your family's reputation. And now that there are consequences for that decision, you want me to act mature and make it all go away? The guest list was never about you personally. It was about maintaining the appropriate atmosphere for the ceremony. David's career requires careful attention to social presentation and... Stop! The word came out harder than I'd intended, carrying 40 years of frustration with people who thought money determined worth. Catherine, I've been polite to your family for 3 years. I've smiled when you've made comments about my education, my work, my background. I've pretended not to notice when you've excluded me from conversations or treated me like hired help at family gatherings. Silence on the other end. Good. It was time she listened instead of talked. But the moment you decided my own daughter's wedding was too good for me, politeness ended. The moment you convinced her that her father was a liability to her happiness, cooperation ended. Mr. Thompson, surely we can reach some kind of accommodation. David's family has significant resources. If this is about money, this isn't about money, Catherine. If it was about money, I would have sent you a bill for 34 years of raising the woman your son claims to love. This is about respect. This is about recognizing that the man who made Rebecca's success possible deserves to celebrate her happiness. And if we were to reconsider the guest arrangements, if we were to extend an invitation, now we were getting somewhere. I could hear the calculation in her voice, the same tone Rebecca used when she was trying to figure out the minimum effort required to get what she wanted. That would depend on what kind of invitation you're talking about. Are we discussing a pity invitation, where I'm allowed to attend but expected to stay quiet and invisible? Or are we talking about treating me like Rebecca's father, with all the respect and inclusion that role deserves? Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear her internal struggle between her social prejudices and the reality that I now controlled something she needed. I think we could arrange for appropriate recognition of your role in Rebecca's life. Appropriate recognition. Even when she was trying to compromise, Catherine couldn't bring herself to use words like respect or family when referring to me. Catherine, let me save us both some time. Here's what's going to happen. You and your husband and your son are going to sit down with Rebecca and apologize to me for suggesting I wasn't worthy of attending her wedding. You're going to acknowledge that I've been a good father who deserves to be included in family celebrations, and you're going to treat me with genuine respect, not just politeness, from now on. Mr. Thompson, you're asking us to... I'm not asking, Catherine. I'm explaining the conditions under which I might be willing to help resolve the venue situation. Take them or leave them. And if we refuse? I looked out my kitchen window at the garden where Rebecca had played as a child, where I'd taught her to plant seeds and tend growing things with patience and care, where I'd learned that some plants needed harsh winters to bloom properly in the spring. Then Rebecca and David can find their own venue, plan their own wedding, and build their own life without any help from the unreasonable working class father who wasn't good enough for their celebration. You would really do that to your own daughter? Catherine, I'm not doing anything to my daughter. I'm responding to what you and she did to me. The choice of how this ends is entirely yours. I hung up and immediately called Marcus Webb back. Marcus, I've decided to move forward with the full premium package for June 15th. I want everything: flowers, music, catering, photography, the complete luxury experience. Excellent, Mr. Thompson. Do you have specific vendors in mind, or would you like our recommendations? I want the best of everything. Cost is no object, but I need it all arranged by this afternoon. This afternoon? Sir, that's extremely short notice for vendors of that caliber. Marcus, I'm about to teach some people a very expensive lesson about the difference between having money and having class. Whatever it costs to make that happen, I'm prepared to pay. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my kitchen had been transformed into mission control for the most expensive lesson I'd ever taught. Contracts, vendor agreements, and payment receipts covered every surface, each document representing another piece of the puzzle I was methodically assembling. Marcus Webb had delivered on every impossible request. Thornfield Florals, booked solid through next year, had somehow found availability after I offered to pay triple their standard rates. Symphony Strings, the classical quartet that typically performed for governors' wives and senators' daughters, had canceled another engagement when presented with an offer they couldn't refuse. Even Celestial Catering, whose waiting list was longer than most people's retirement plans, had agreed to provide their signature 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings. The numbers were staggering. Flowers alone would cost more than I'd spent on my first car. The photography package exceeded what most people earned in 6 months. The music, catering, and venue coordination brought the total to a figure that would have seemed impossible when Rebecca was young, and every dollar had been carefully allocated between necessities. But impossibility was exactly the point I was making. My phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. Dad, David's parents want to meet with us tonight. Please say you'll consider working this out. I can't lose everything over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. 3 days ago, I'd been told I wasn't sophisticated enough for her wedding. Today it was being reframed as a simple miscommunication between reasonable adults. I typed back, 7 o'clock, my house, all 4 of you. Then I called my brother Tommy, the only person who'd understand what I was really doing and why it mattered. Jesus Christ, Robert, you bought out 3 wedding venues in one day? Tommy's voice carried the mixture of admiration and concern that had defined our relationship since childhood. He was the brother who'd taken risks, started his own landscaping company, understood that sometimes you had to make dramatic gestures to get people's attention. Not bought out. Booked. There's a difference? Bullshit, there's a difference. You spent more money yesterday than most people see in 5 years. What's the endgame here? I looked at the contracts spread across my table, each one representing a choice between being respected and being ignored. The endgame is teaching my daughter that family loyalty isn't negotiable. And if she doesn't learn the lesson, then I'll have 3 beautiful venues and no one to use them. But at least I'll have my dignity. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. He'd been there through Rebecca's childhood, had watched me work double shifts to pay for her opportunities, had seen the pride in my eyes every time she'd achieved something new. You know what, brother? Good for you. It's about time someone in that family remembered who paid for all their fancy dreams. After I hung up with Tommy, I spent the afternoon preparing for the evening's confrontation. I cleaned the house the same way I used to when Rebecca brought friends over, making sure every surface gleamed and every detail was perfect. Not because I cared what David's parents thought of my home, but because I wanted them to see exactly what kind of man they'd underestimated. At exactly 7 o'clock, 2 cars pulled into my driveway. Rebecca and David in his BMW, followed by a silver Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd made in my best year. I watched from my living room window as they gathered on my front walk, clearly strategizing their approach like lawyers preparing for a difficult negotiation. The doorbell rang once, sharp and formal. I opened it to find all 4 of them arranged like a delegation, with Catherine and her husband Richard flanking Rebecca and David like bodyguards protecting valuable assets. Dad, Rebecca said, her voice carefully neutral. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Richard's eyes swept my living room with the practiced assessment of someone used to evaluating other people's net worth based on their furnishings. What he saw was a comfortable middle-class home, well-maintained, but clearly the residence of someone who'd worked for everything he owned. What he couldn't see was the man who'd just spent more on wedding venues than Richard probably spent on his country club membership. Please sit down, I said, gesturing toward the seating area I'd arranged to give myself a clear view of all their faces. Can I offer anyone coffee? Catherine's smile was the kind that appeared in charity fundraising brochures. That's very kind, but we don't want to take up too much of your evening. Too much of my evening, as if this meeting was an imposition on my time rather than a consequence of their decisions. I settled into my chair, the same one where I'd helped Rebecca with homework, where I'd listened to her teenage problems, where I'd celebrated every achievement and milestone of her life. Now it felt like a judge's bench. So, I said quietly, who wants to start? David cleared his throat, shifting into the authoritative tone he probably used with opposing counsel. Mr. Thompson, we appreciate your willingness to discuss this situation rationally. We understand there may have been some miscommunication about the wedding arrangements. Miscommunication, not discrimination, not exclusion. Just a simple failure to properly convey information. David, there was no miscommunication. Your fiancé called me Tuesday morning and told me I wasn't invited to her wedding because I didn't meet your family's standards for appropriate guests. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone used to controlling conversations through sheer presence. Mr. Thompson, I think you may have misinterpreted the situation. Family weddings often require difficult decisions about guest lists, especially when space is limited. Space wasn't limited at any of the venues Rebecca toured. Grandview Manor holds 200 people. Riverside Gardens accommodates 300. The Whitmore estate can handle even larger celebrations. The specific numbers landed like artillery shells in the middle of their carefully constructed narrative. I watched their faces change as they realized I knew exactly what venues had been available, exactly what capacity they offered, exactly what kind of celebration had been planned. Catherine's composure slipped slightly. How do you know about those venues? Because I own the bookings for all three of them. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes explosions. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the recognition that their entire strategy had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who they were dealing with. Rebecca found her voice first, though it came out smaller than usual. Dad, what do you mean you own the bookings? I mean that yesterday, after learning I wasn't good enough to attend your wedding, I drove to all three venues you toured and paid cash deposits to secure them for June 15th. Grandview Manor, Riverside Gardens, and the historic Whitmore estate are all exclusively booked under my name. David's legal training kicked in, his voice sharpening with accusation. That's interference with business relations? Possibly harassment? I can just what, David? Spend my own money on legal business transactions? Book venues that were available for rent? Exercise the same economic freedom your family takes for granted? Richard leaned forward, his tone shifting to something that might have been intimidating if I hadn't just spent $60,000 proving I was beyond intimidation. Mr. Thompson, you're clearly upset about a family disagreement, but this kind of behavior is unacceptable. My son and his fiancée deserve to have their wedding without this kind of manipulation. Manipulation. The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire I deliberately set. Richard, let me tell you about manipulation. Manipulation is convincing a daughter that her father isn't sophisticated enough for her wedding. Manipulation is using social pressure to exclude someone who spent 34 years sacrificing for your son's happiness. What I did yesterday wasn't manipulation. It was capitalism. Catherine's mask of politeness was cracking visibly. This is extortion, plain and simple. You're holding their wedding hostage to force us to include you. No, Catherine, I'm holding their wedding venues hostage to force you to treat me with basic human decency. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with the folder of contracts I'd organized like evidence in a trial. Setting it on the coffee table between us, I opened it to reveal the scope of what I'd accomplished in less than 24 hours. These are legally binding contracts for 3 of the most exclusive wedding venues in the city, all booked for June 15th. The deposits are non-refundable, the terms are ironclad, and the total cost is approximately $180,000. Rebecca's face went white. $180,000? That's just the venues. The full wedding packages I've arranged cost significantly more. Richard's voice dropped to the tone he probably used in boardroom negotiations. What exactly are you asking for, Mr. Thompson? Finally, the right question. I closed the folder and looked at each of them in turn. These four people who'd decided my presence would diminish their perfect day. I'm asking for what I should have received automatically: respect, recognition that I'm Rebecca's father and deserve to be included in her wedding, an acknowledgement that the man who raised her, educated her, and made her success possible has earned the right to celebrate her happiness. And if we agree to these terms, David asked carefully, then Rebecca gets the wedding of her dreams at Grandview Manor, with flowers from Thornfield, music from Symphony Strings, and catering from Celestial. Everything she's ever wanted, plus some things she probably never dared to hope for. And if we don't agree? I smiled, feeling the same satisfaction I'd experienced when landing my first major construction contract. Then you'll find other venues, other vendors, and other ways to celebrate. And I'll use my bookings for something else entirely. Catherine couldn't help herself. What could you possibly do with 3 wedding venues? I've been thinking about that. Maybe I'll throw a party for all the construction workers, electricians, plumbers, and painters who've helped build the houses your friends live in. Give them a chance to experience the kind of luxury they create but never get to enjoy. Show them what it feels like to be treated like honored guests instead of hired help. The image hit them exactly as I'd intended. They're exclusive venues filled with working-class families. They're sophisticated spaces occupied by people who understood the value of hard work and honest labor. Rebecca spoke for the first time since learning about the money I'd spent. Daddy, I never meant for things to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, sweetheart. And more importantly, you let other people convince you that hurting me was acceptable as long as it served their purposes. I walked over to where she sat, this daughter I'd raised with such hope and love, and knelt down so we were eye to eye the way I used to when she was small and needed comfort. Rebecca, do you remember what I told you when you graduated college? When you were worried about starting your career, about whether you were smart enough and strong enough to succeed in a competitive world? Tears were forming in her eyes. You said I could accomplish anything because I had something most people didn't have. And what was that? A father who believed in me no matter what. That's right, a father who believed in you no matter what. A father who worked overtime for years to pay for your education. A father who was proud of every achievement, who celebrated every success, who was always in your corner no matter what challenges you faced. I stood up and looked at David and his parents, these people who'd tried to erase me from the most important day of my daughter's life. That father still exists. That support system is still available. That unconditional love is still here, waiting for Rebecca to remember that family loyalty works both ways. The room fell silent except for the sound of Rebecca crying softly, not the manipulative tears she'd used as a teenager to get her way, but the genuine grief of someone who'd realized they'd made a terrible mistake. David reached for her hand, his voice gentler than it had been all evening. Rebecca, maybe we should reconsider the whole arrangement. Catherine shot him a look that could have frozen fire, but Richard surprised everyone by nodding slowly. The boy's right. We may have been too hasty in our guest list decisions. Too hasty, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Richard met my eyes with what might have been the beginning of actual respect. Mr. Thompson, I think we may have underestimated both your feelings about this situation and your ability to do something about it. Richard, I've been underestimated my entire life, by teachers who thought I wasn't college material, by clients who assumed I couldn't handle complex projects, by people who confused the work I do with the intelligence required to do it well. The difference is, I've never let other people's underestimation stop me from achieving what I wanted. And what is it you want from this situation? I looked around the room at these 4 people, whose lives I could make significantly more complicated with a few phone calls. The power felt intoxicating, like finally having the leverage I'd never possessed in family discussions. I want Rebecca to have the wedding she's dreamed of since she was little. I want to walk her down the aisle at Grandview Manor, while Symphony Strings plays her favorite song. I want to give a father of the bride speech about watching her grow from a determined little girl into a remarkable woman. I want to dance with my daughter at her wedding reception. My voice caught slightly on the last part, the emotion breaking through despite my efforts to stay controlled. And I want her husband's family to understand that the man who made all of this possible deserves to be treated as family, not as hired help who can be dismissed when he's no longer useful. Catherine's voice was barely audible. And if we agree to all of this, then tomorrow morning I'll call Marcus Webb at Grandview Manor and authorize the transfer of my booking to Mr. and Mrs. David Ashworth. I'll contact all the vendors and arrange for them to coordinate directly with Rebecca for her perfect wedding day. And the other venues? I smiled, thinking about the phone calls I'd make to cancel those bookings, the deposits I'd forfeit without a second thought. Those will be my wedding gift to Rebecca, the most expensive gesture of faith I've ever made. David cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, if we move forward with this arrangement, I want you to know that you'll be treated with complete respect by my family. What happened this week was wrong, and it won't happen again. I appreciate that, David, but understand this. Respect isn't something you can promise and then forget about when it becomes inconvenient. Respect is something you demonstrate consistently, over time, through your actions and your words. Rebecca wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 12 years old and had broken her mother's favorite vase while practicing soccer in the living room. Pure contrition mixed with hope for forgiveness. Daddy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. For hurting you, for letting them convince me you weren't good enough, for forgetting that you've never let me down. Not once in my entire life. The apology hit harder than anger would have. This was my little girl, the one who'd made Father's Day cards from construction paper, who'd insisted I read her bedtime stories in different voices for each character, who'd told her kindergarten class that her daddy was the strongest man in the world. Sweetheart, apologies are a start, but what I need to see is change. I need to see that you've learned something from this experience about what family really means. I have learned, Daddy. I promise I have. I looked at this group of people who'd underestimated me so completely, who'd assumed I would accept exclusion quietly and gratefully. Tomorrow, Rebecca would have access to the wedding of her dreams. David's family would have their sophisticated celebration with all the right people in all the right places. But tonight, they'd all learn something about the difference between having class and having money, between being powerful and being respected. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. How did it go, brother? I looked around my living room at these 4 people who were waiting for me to make the decision that would determine whether Rebecca's wedding dreams came true or fell apart completely. The power to choose felt better than any paycheck I'd ever earned. It went exactly as planned, I typed back. Sometimes the best lessons are the most expensive ones. But as I looked at Rebecca's tear-stained face, I realized the real lesson wasn't about money at all. It was about understanding that love without respect is just exploitation with better intentions. And that was a lesson worth every penny I'd spent to teach it. The choice of what happened next was mine to make. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged, in complete control of my own story.